Strike Back, Part 5. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Valkyrie base, warships appeared in Earth's orbit. 3 massive cruisers bearing the insignia of the Valkyrie Dominion hung in the sky like harbingers of doom. Their weapon systems, fully charged, and their commanders demanding immediate answers. The people of Earth looked up in fear as the alien vessels blocked out the stars. Emergency broadcasts interrupted every channel on the planet, carrying the Valkyrie's ultimatum to every screen and speaker. The humans responsible for the attack on our sovereign installation must be surrendered within 48 hours. The Valkyrie Admiral announced with cold fury in his voice, "Failure to comply will result in punitive measures against your species that will serve as a lesson to the entire galaxy." Earth's government panicked in exactly the way Dae-Sung had expected. Politicians and diplomats scrambled to identify the perpetrators, and military leaders argued about whether resistance was even possible against such overwhelming force. The common people waited in terrified silence for their leaders to decide their fate. But Dae-Sung had not been idle during those 2 weeks. He had been preparing for exactly this moment from a hidden location deep in the mountains. Surrounded by the Sansan warriors who had become his family, Dae-Sung transmitted a message to every news network on Earth. Within minutes, his face appeared on billions of screens across the planet. "My name is Yoon Dae-Sung," he said calmly. "I am a retired sergeant major of the United States Navy SEALs, and I am the one responsible for the attack on the Valkyrie base in the Cascade Mountains." He paused to let that information sink in before continuing. "I did not act alone, but my allies are not human, and they are not responsible for the political consequences of what we have done together." The transmission shifted to show footage recovered from the Valkyrie base. Recordings of captive forest titans being processed for transport, documents detailing decades of illegal harvesting operations. For generations, the Valkyrie Dominion has been conducting slavery operations on protected worlds throughout the galaxy, including Earth. More footage appeared, this time showing Valkyrie soldiers capturing forest titans in the wilderness, loading them onto unmarked ships, selling them to buyers in distant systems. They have taken thousands of beings from their homes and families, and they have done so in violation of every law and treaty that the galactic hegemony claims to uphold. Dae-Sung's voice hardened with controlled anger. "My son, Lieutenant Yoon Min-jun, discovered evidence of these crimes while serving as a liaison officer aboard a hegemony vessel. And when he tried to report what he found, the Valkyrie murdered him to keep their secrets hidden." The image of Min-jun appeared on screens across the world. A young man in uniform, smiling with the optimism of someone who believed that truth and justice meant something. "I did not attack that base for revenge, though I will not pretend that revenge was not part of my motivation." Dae-Sung looked directly into the camera with eyes that had seen too much and lost too much and fought through it anyway. "I attacked that base to free the innocent beings being held there, to expose the truth about what our supposed allies have been doing, and to prove that humanity will not stand by while evil flourishes in our own backyard." The transmission ended with coordinates and encryption keys that allowed any government or news organization to verify the evidence for themselves. Within hours, the galaxy was in an uproar. The Galactic Hegemony Council convened an emergency session as species from across the stars demanded investigations into Valkyrie activities on their own worlds. Journalists and investigators descended on the evidence like predators on wounded prey, uncovering connections and cover-ups that reached into the highest levels of hegemony governance. The Valkyrie Admiral in Earth orbit found his demands suddenly ignored as his own government scrambled to contain the scandal. His cruisers retreated from Earth's sky without firing a single shot, recalled to face questions about their role in operations that had been hidden for far too long. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. The Valkyrie Dominion's military charter was suspended pending investigation, and dozens of high-ranking officials were arrested on charges of trafficking and corruption. The slave operations across the outer territories were shut down, and thousands of captive beings were returned to their home worlds after decades of forced labor on Earth. The primitive newcomer that had only joined the hegemony 3 years ago was granted enhanced protectorship status in recognition of its role in exposing the scandal. Humanity had proven something that the older species had not expected. Humans would fight for those who could not fight for themselves. Humans would challenge power even when the odds seemed impossible. Humans would stand up for what was right, even when standing up meant standing alone in the chaos that followed the revelation. No one paid much attention to reports from wilderness areas about unusual activity in the deep forests. No one connected the strange footage from the Valkyrie base to old legends about creatures that walked like men and lived in the shadows of mountains. The forest titans remained a secret, and Daesung intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. He returned to the mountains one final time as the seasons began to change, and the first hints of winter touched the highest peaks. Bigsan and the United Clans were preparing to move deeper into the wilderness, away from the world that would soon begin asking questions about what else might be hidden in the unexplored territories of their own planet. Daesung brought gifts for his departure, supplies, tools, and knowledge that would help the Sansan protect themselves in the years to come. But the most important gift was something simpler. He gave Bigsan a photograph of Minjun, the same image he had shown during that first desperate communication in the Hidden Valley. "My son died protecting people he never met," Daesung said as Qianha translated his words. He believed that every life had value, that every being deserved protection, and he gave everything to prove that belief. He pressed the photograph into Bigsan's massive hands. "You carry that same honor now, all of you, and my son would have been proud to call you allies." Bigsan looked at the image for a long moment, then made a gesture that Daesung had learned to recognize as the highest form of respect. He was accepting the gift not as a token, but as a responsibility. Qianha stepped forward with tears in her eyes and embraced Daesung with surprising gentleness. Her mother stood nearby, still recovering from years of captivity, but growing stronger every day. "You gave us back our future," Qianha said in the broken human speech she had learned during their months together. "We will not forget." Bigsan made one final gesture, a formal pronouncement that brought the entire community to respectful silence. Qianha translated with obvious emotion. "He gives you a name in our tongue, Sansan Yu Ayabaji." She paused to compose herself. "It means father of the mountain spirits, and you are the first human to ever receive such an honor." Daesung bowed deeply, accepting the name and everything it represented. When he finally walked out of the forest for the last time, he carried something he had not possessed in many months. He carried peace. Years passed and the world moved on. The Valkyrie scandal faded from headlines as new dramas captured the galaxy's attention. Earth continued its slow integration into galactic society, learning and growing and occasionally surprising its neighbors with unexpected resilience. Scientists began to take the old Sasquatch legend seriously, organizing expeditions into the deep wilderness to search for evidence of an undiscovered intelligent species. They found nothing. The forest titans had learned to hide from far more dangerous hunters than curious humans, and they had no intention of being found. But every spring, when the snow melted and the mountain paths became passable again, a retired sergeant major would walk into the Cascade Wilderness and disappear for several weeks. He always returned with stories that he never wrote down and memories that he never shared. Sometimes younger family members or curious journalists would ask where he went and what he did during those weeks away from civilization. Daesung would just smile and say that he was visiting old friends who preferred their privacy, and somewhere in the deep forest, in valleys that appeared on no map and clearings where no human had ever walked, the mountain spirits continued their ancient way of life. They hunted and they raised their young, and they told stories around evening fires about the human who had taught them to fight back against the monsters from the stars. They remembered Minjun, whose sacrifice had started everything. They remembered Daesung, who had turned grief into purpose and vengeance into justice. And they remained vigilant, watching the skies and guarding their territory, ready to face whatever threats might come. Because they were no longer helpless, they were no longer forgotten, they were the Sansin. And they had learned that even the smallest and most overlooked beings could shake the stars when they found the courage to stand together. That was the lesson humanity had taught them. That was the legacy one father had built from the ashes of his loss, and that was the story that would echo through the mountains for generations to come. The attack began on a moonless night when darkness lay across the mountain valley like a living shroud. Daesung had chosen the timing with care, because the Valkyrie relied heavily on their technology for night vision and thermal detection. They trusted their sensors to warn them of approaching threats. They had never faced an enemy that knew exactly how those sensors worked. The first phase was silent elimination. 30 of the stealthiest Sansin warriors moved through the perimeter like shadows made solid, targeting the outer guard posts one by one. The Valkyrie guards never saw their deaths coming. One moment they stood at their positions, secure in their technological superiority, and the next moment massive hands emerged from the darkness to end them without a sound. Jiamyung led this phase personally, his black fur making him nearly invisible in the lightless forest. He had waited 5 years for this moment. 5 years of wondering if his sister still lived. 5 years of helpless rage against enemies he could not reach. Now he reached them, and they learned what it meant to be hunted by something they could not see within 30 minutes. The outer perimeter was clear. No alarms had been raised and no distress signals had been sent. The Valkyrie base continued its normal operations, completely unaware that death was closing in from all directions. The second phase targeted the communication tower. Daesung led this team himself, guiding a dozen warriors through the compound, using routes he had mapped during his reconnaissance. They avoided the main pathways where patrols walked and security cameras watched, instead moving through maintenance tunnels and service corridors that the Valkyrie considered too small for serious threats. They were wrong. The communication technicians died at their stations, and Chunha used the skills Daesung had taught her to disable the transmission arrays in a way that would not immediately register as sabotage. When the Valkyrie finally realized they needed to call for help, the equipment would fail at the worst possible moment. The third phase was liberation. Chanha led this team toward the holding pens, her heart pounding with emotions she had suppressed for most of her life. Her mother was in those cages, alive after all these years, and soon they would be reunited. But she forced herself to stay focused on the mission. Personal feelings would have to wait. The guards at the holding facility were more numerous than the outer perimeter, and stealth alone would not be enough to overcome them. This was where the main assault began. Jiumyun's warriors attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, crashing through walls and barriers with the unstoppable force of an avalanche. The Valkyrie soldiers scrambled to respond, grabbing their plasma rifles and activating their energy shields. But their training had never prepared them for this kind of enemy. They were accustomed to fighting at range, using their superior firepower to overwhelm primitive opponents before they could close the distance. The Sansin did not give them that distance. 9-foot warriors covered ground with terrifying speed, closing to arm's length before the Valkyrie could bring their weapons to bear. In close combat, energy shields meant nothing because the Sansin simply grabbed their opponents and crushed them through sheer physical force. Plasma rifles, designed for accuracy at 50 meters, were useless when a massive hand wrapped around the barrel and bent it into scrap metal. The fighting was brutal and one-sided in ways the Valkyrie had never experienced. They had spent generations as the predators, taking what they wanted from primitive worlds without consequence. Now they were prey, and they died with expressions of disbelief frozen on their alien faces. Tianha reached the holding pens and began breaking open the cages with her bare hands. The prisoners inside were weak from sedation and poor treatment, but their eyes blazed with hope as they saw their own kind fighting back. "Mother," Tianha called out as she searched through the cages. "Mother, where are you?" A faint voice answered from the far end of the facility. Tianha ran toward it and found an elderly female huddled in the corner of the last cage, her fur matted and her body thin from years of captivity. But her eyes, when they looked up at Tianha, held recognition and joy and disbelief all at once. Mother and daughter embraced through the bars until Tianha tore them apart with strength fueled by love and rage. "I never stopped looking," Tianha whispered. "I never stopped hoping." Throughout the compound, the tide of battle turned decisively in favor of the Sanson Velthari soldiers, fell by the dozens, their advanced technology meaningless against enemies who fought with ancient fury and modern tactics. But Daesoon had one more objective to complete. He moved through the chaos of battle toward the command center, where the base commander waited behind reinforced doors and emergency shields. The commander was a high-ranking Velthari officer named Korvax, who had overseen operations on Earth for nearly 2 decades. According to Minchun's files, he was also the one who had personally ordered the execution of a troublesome human lieutenant who asked too many questions. The reinforced doors meant nothing to Daesoon. He had brought specialized charges designed to breach exactly this type of barrier. Equipment he had acquired during supply runs to human settlements that did not ask questions about his intentions. The explosion tore the doors from their frames, and Daesoon walked through the smoke with the calm focus of a man who had waited months for this moment. Korvax stood behind his desk, holding a plasma pistol aimed at the human intruder. "You should not be here," the Velthari commander said with arrogance that death could not shake. "Your species is nothing, a footnote in galactic history, and whatever you have done here tonight will be erased." Daesoon stopped 10 feet from the desk. "You killed my son," he said quietly. His name was Yoon Min-jun, and he was 28 years old. "And you murdered him because he tried to protect innocent beings from your cruelty." Korvax laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. "The liaison officer, yes, I remember him now. Such a righteous fool who thought the truth would matter to anyone." He raised his pistol with practiced ease, just like his father. It seems, Korvax fired, but Daesoon was already moving, decades of combat instincts carrying him sideways as the plasma bolt scorched the air where he had stood. Before Korvax could fire again, Daesoon was across the desk and on top of him, driving the alien to the ground with the fury of a father who had nothing left to lose. The pistol skidded across the floor. Forgotten Daesoon did not reach for it. He did not need a weapon for this. His hands wrapped around the Velthari's throat as memories of his son flashed through his mind. Minchun's first steps, Minchun's graduation day, Minchun's smile in that final recording as he explained why doing the right thing was worth any price. "My son believed in building bridges," Daesoon said as Korvax struggled beneath him. "He believed that different species could work together and understand each other." He squeezed harder. "I believe in something simpler." The light faded from Korvax's eyes slowly, and Daesoon made sure the alien had time to understand what was happening to him. "I believe that those who hurt the innocent should face consequences," Daesoon whispered, "and I believe that fathers should be there to deliver them." When it was over, Daesoon stood and walked out of the command center without looking back. The battle was ending throughout the compound, the last Velthari defenders falling to the relentless assault of the Sanson warriors. But somewhere in the communications room, a single distress signal had slipped out before the systems failed completely. Someone had heard. Someone was coming. Daesung looked up at the stars and knew that the real fight was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Daesung first walked into the forest as a broken father seeking vengeance. Now he stood before an army. The training had been harder than anything he had attempted in his decades of military service. Not because the forest titans lacked ability, but because they possessed so much raw potential that needed direction. These beings were natural warriors with instincts that rivaled the most elite special forces operators he had ever served with. They could move through dense forest without making a sound despite weighing several hundred pounds. They could track prey across miles of wilderness using senses that humans could barely imagine. They could strike with enough force to shatter stone, and they could endure punishment that would kill any human soldier. What they lacked was knowledge of their enemy. The Valkyrie relied on technology that seemed like magic to beings who had never left their mountain homes. Plasma weapons that could burn through flesh at a distance, energy shields that could stop any physical attack, sensors that could detect movement and body heat across vast distances, flying vessels that could appear without warning and disappear just as quickly. Daesung taught them everything he knew. He showed them how to use the forest itself as a weapon, creating traps and ambush points that would negate the Valkyrie's technological advantages. He designed weapons suited to their incredible strength, modified crossbows with draw weights that no human could manage, and weighted clubs reinforced with metal scraps that could crack alien armor. He taught them the principles of guerrilla warfare, how to strike fast and vanish into the wilderness before the enemy could respond. Chan Ha proved to be his most valuable student. Her mind absorbed tactical concepts with frightening speed, and she began developing strategies that even Daesung had not considered. She understood that the Valkyrie's greatest weakness was their arrogance. They had been hunting the forest titans for generations without facing serious resistance, and that comfort had made them careless. But one clan was not enough for what Daesung planned over the following weeks. He traveled with small groups to meet the other communities scattered throughout the mountain range. The first 3 clans rejected them immediately. They had survived by hiding from all outsiders, human and alien alike, and they saw no reason to change that strategy now. The 4th clan nearly killed them. Their leader, a massive warrior with fur as black as midnight, attacked without warning when Daesung's group entered their territory. This was Jeomyun, the Dark One, and he hated humans with a fury that burned like forest fire. His sister had been taken by the Valkyrie 5 years ago, captured while human hikers watched from a distance and did nothing to help. In his mind, humans were either enemies or cowards, and neither deserved his trust. The challenge he issued was absolute. If any member of Daesung's group could defeat him in single combat, he would listen to their words. If not, they would be killed where they stood. The warriors from Bigfoots clan shifted nervously because Jeomyun was known throughout the mountains as the most dangerous fighter of his generation. No one had ever beaten him in ritual combat. Daesung stepped forward before any of his companions could volunteer. "I will face him," he announced, ignoring the shocked protests from Chanha. The fight that followed was the most brutal experience of Daesung's life. Jeomyun was faster than anything his size had any right to be, and his blows landed with force that cracked ribs and shattered expectations. Daesung could not match him in strength or speed or endurance, but Daesung had spent 25 years learning to fight enemies who outmatched him in every physical category. He had learned to use pain as fuel and weakness as misdirection. He had learned that the fight was never truly over until one opponent stopped getting up for 20 minutes. Daesung absorbed punishment that should have killed him 3 times over. He let Jeomyun believe he was broken, Let the massive warrior grow confident in his inevitable victory, and when Jiomyu moved in for the finishing blow, Daesung struck. The technique was one he had learned from a Korean martial arts master decades ago. A precise strike to a cluster of nerves that existed in all mammals. Regardless of species, Jiomyu collapsed like a falling tree. Temporarily paralyzed from the shoulders down, Daesung stood over him, swaying on feet that could barely support his battered body, and offered the Dark One his hand. "Your sister is still out there," Daesung said through lips swollen with blood. "Help me, and we will find her together." Jiomyu stared at him for a long moment. Then he took the offered hand and rose to his feet. The fourth clan joined their cause that day, and Jiomyu became one of Daesung's most loyal captains. Word of the human who had defeated the Dark One spread through the mountains like wildfire. Within weeks, 6 clans had pledged their warriors to the alliance. Over 200 forest titans now trained together under Daesung's guidance, learning to fight as a coordinated force rather than individual hunters. He gave them a name that honored both their nature and their purpose. He called them the Sansin, the mountain spirits of Korean legend, protectors of the wilderness and enemies of those who would do harm at night. When the training was done and his students rested, Daesung would sit alone and think about his son. He would remember Minjun as a child, curious and fearless, always asking questions about the world and how things worked. He would remember Minjun as a young man, idealistic and determined, choosing to serve as a bridge between species rather than a warrior. He would remember Minchun's final recording, the tired eyes and the steady voice, explaining why he could not look away from suffering, even when it cost him everything. Daesung understood now that his son had given him more than evidence and coordinates. Minjun had given him a mission worthy of the sacrifice, not revenge. Though revenge would come, purpose, the purpose of protecting those who could not protect themselves, of standing against evil, even when the odds seemed impossible. As the final preparations for the assault began, Daesung scouted the Veltri base with Chianha and a small team of the stealthiest warriors. What they found was worse than expected. The base was larger than the data had suggested, with more soldiers and more ships and more security than any guerrilla force should reasonably challenge. But the holding pens were also larger. Dozens of captives waited in those cages. Forest titans who had been taken from their families and prepared for transport to a life of slavery among the stars. Among them, Chanha spotted a face she recognized: her mother, who had been taken when Chanha was barely more than a child, was still alive. The mission had just become personal for more than just Daesung. This would not be a simple raid for intelligence or sabotage. This would be a rescue operation, and the Sansin would not leave until every last prisoner was free. Daesung had been walking for 11 days when he realized he was being watched. The feeling came to him like an old friend, that familiar prickle at the back of his neck that had saved his life more times than he could count. Someone or something was tracking him through the endless green maze of the deep forest. He had pushed far beyond the boundaries of any marked trail, climbing ridges that appeared on no map and crossing valleys where human footprints had never touched the soil. The trees here were ancient giants, their trunks wider than houses and their branches blocking out the sky like a living roof. This was territory that belonged to something other than humanity. Daesung made camp that night in a small clearing, building his fire larger than necessary and cooking his food with deliberate noise. He was announcing his presence, showing that he was not hiding, inviting contact. The creatures came for him just before dawn. He heard nothing until they were already surrounding his camp, emerging from the shadows between the trees like ghosts made solid. They were massive, standing over 9 feet tall, with shoulders as broad as doorways and arms that could tear a man apart without effort. Their bodies were covered in thick fur that ranged from deep brown to silver gray, and their faces held expressions of intelligence that no animal could possess. Daesung counted 7 of them before rough hands grabbed him from behind and lifted him off the ground. Like he weighed nothing at all, they did not speak, but their eyes communicated everything. He was a prisoner now. They carried him through the forest for hours, moving with a speed and silence that seemed impossible for creatures of their size. Daesung did not struggle because resistance would only make them see him as a threat. Instead, he remained calm and observed everything around him. The group traveled along paths that were invisible to human eyes, stepping over fallen logs and ducking under branches with the ease of beings who had walked these routes for generations. Finally, they emerged into a hidden valley where a community awaited them. Daesung stared in wonder at what he saw. There were dozens of the creatures here, perhaps 100, living in structures made from woven branches and animal hides that blended perfectly with the surrounding forest. Females tended to young ones who peered at the human captive with curious eyes. Elderly individuals sat in groups, their fur white with age, watching the proceedings with solemn attention. The warriors who had captured him brought Daesung to the center of the settlement and forced him to his knees before the largest creature he had. Yet seemed this one was old. His fur streaked with silver and his body marked with scars that spoke of countless battles survived, but his eyes held something more than age and experience. They held grief. Daesung recognized that look because he saw it every time he looked in a mirror. "I am not your enemy," Daesung said slowly, keeping his hands visible and his posture submissive. The silver creature studied him for a long moment, then made a series of sounds that the others seemed to understand. A younger female approached, smaller than the others, but with bright, intelligent eyes that watched Daesung with fascination rather than fear. She crouched before him and made a gesture toward his chest, then toward the mountains beyond the valley. Daesung understood. She was asking why he had come. He reached slowly into his pack, ignoring the warning growls from the surrounding warriors, and pulled out a printed image from his son's files. It showed Velthari soldiers standing over captured creatures. The forest titans bound and caged and waiting to be shipped to distant stars. The reaction was immediate and devastating. The silver leader roared with a sound that shook the trees, and the entire community erupted in cries of recognition and rage. They knew these images because they had lived them. The young female took the image and stared at it with tears forming in her eyes. She pointed at one of the captured creatures in the picture, and then at herself, making sounds of desperate sorrow. Daesung understood that she had lost someone too. "They took your family," he said quietly. "They took my son." He pulled out another image, this one showing Min-jun in his uniform, smiling at the camera with the confidence of youth that would never grow old. "The same beings who hunt you killed my child because he tried to stop them." The female studied the image of Min-jun with genuine interest, and something like sympathy crossed her alien features. She looked at the silver leader and made a series of gestures and sounds that Daesung could not follow. The old creature approached him, moving with the careful dignity of someone who had carried authority for many years. He reached out one massive hand and touched the image of Min-jun with surprising gentleness. Then he touched his own chest and made a sound that needed no translation loss. They stood there in silence, a human warrior and an inhuman elder, connected by the universal language of grief. Finally, the silver creature made a decision. He helped Daesung to his feet and gestured toward the community around them. He was being offered something rare and precious. He was being offered a chance to explain himself over the following days. Daesung learned to communicate with his hosts through a combination of gestures, drawings, and patience. The young female proved to be remarkably quick at understanding his meaning, and she became his translator to the rest of the clan. He learned that the Silver Leader was called something that sounded like distant thunder rolling through mountain valleys. But they soon came to call him Big San, which meant White Mountain in the language of his ancestors. He learned that the young female was Chianha, which he chose because her curiosity reminded him of the endless sky. He learned that the Velthari had been hunting their kind for longer than any living member could remember, appearing without warning and taking victims who were never seen again. And he learned that despite their strength and their knowledge of the forest titans had no way to fight back against enemies who came from the stars. This was why Daesun had come. "I can teach you," he told Big San through Chanha's translation. "I can show you how to fight them, how to hurt them, how to make them afraid of you." Big San listened with ancient eyes that had seen too much suffering. "But I need your help." Daesun continued. "The beings who took your people have a hidden place in these mountains. And in that place, they hold captives waiting to be taken away forever." He showed them the coordinates from his son's files. "Together, we can free them, and together, we can make the Velthari pay for what they have done to both our peoples." Big San considered for a long time while the entire community waited in silence. Then he made a gesture that Daesun had come to recognize as agreement, but the old leader added something else. A warning, Chanha translated as best she could. There were other clans scattered throughout the mountains, and some of them would not trust a human simply because Big San did. If Daesun wanted an army, he would have to earn it. Daesun nodded his understanding. He had built coalitions in hostile territory before he had won the trust of people who had every reason to hate him. This would be no different to war against the Velthari would require more than one clan. It would require all of them, and Daesun would find a way to unite them. No matter how long it took, for Minjun, for the captives waiting in darkness, for the alliance that would shake the stars. The rain fell hard on the cabin roof as Yoon Dae-sung sat alone in the darkness of his living room. He had not turned on the lights for 3 days now, and the empty whiskey bottle on the table told its own story of grief and rage at 52 years old. The retired Navy SEAL had survived 25 years of the most dangerous missions humanity had ever known. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. His son was dead. Lieutenant Yoon Minjun had been executed by the Velthari Dominion on a border world called Nexer Prime, and the galactic broadcast had shown his final moments to billions of beings across the stars. They called him a spy and a threat to galactic security. Dae-sung knew the truth because his son had never been a spy. Minjun had been a liaison officer, a bridge between humanity and the alien civilizations they had only recently joined in the galactic community. 3 years ago, First Contact had changed everything for Earth, and humanity had eagerly accepted the invitation to join the galactic hegemony. As junior members, Minjun had been among the first to volunteer for service aboard alien vessels, believing that cooperation and understanding would secure humanity's place among the stars. Now he was gone, and no one would tell Dae-sung why the Earth government had sent representatives to his cabin with hollow words of sympathy and official explanations that explained nothing. "Your son died serving humanity's interests," they had said with practiced sincerity. "We cannot risk our relationship with the hegemony over one officer," they had admitted when pressed. "You must understand our position," they had pleaded. When he had demanded justice, Dae-sung understood perfectly. Humanity was new to the galactic stage and weak compared to the ancient civilizations that ruled the stars. Earth could not challenge the Velthari Dominion any more than an ant could challenge a boot. But Dae-sung was not humanity, and he was not an ant. He was a father who had lost his only child, and somewhere deep in his chest, where his heart used to beat with warmth, there was now only cold fire. The knock on his door came at midnight. Dae-sung moved through the darkness without sound, old instincts awakening despite his grief, and his hand found the pistol he kept beneath the couch cushion. He opened the door to find no one there. On his doorstep sat a small package wrapped in black, material unlike anything made on Earth. He scanned the tree line with practiced eyes, but saw nothing in the rain and darkness. Inside the package, he found a data chip and a note written in his son's handwriting. "Father, if you receive this, I am already dead, and what I discovered has killed me. But I could not stay silent while innocents suffered at the hands of those who call themselves our allies." Daesung's hands trembled as he inserted the chip into his secure terminal. Min Chun's face appeared on the screen. Recorded weeks before his death, and the sight of his boy alive and speaking nearly broke the old warrior's composure. "The Velthri are not what they seem," Min Jun explained in the recording. "They have been harvesting primitive species from protected worlds for generations, taking them as slaves for labor in the outer territories where hegemony oversight never reaches." Min Chan's eyes were tired but determined as he continued. "I found evidence, Father, records of ships and coordinates and transactions that prove everything. But the worst discovery I made concerns Earth itself." Daesung leaned closer to the screen. "The Velthri have been operating on Earth for decades, long before first contact, hidden in the remote wilderness where no human travels. And they have been taking specimens of a native species that humanity does not even know exists." The recording showed documents in alien script alongside translations. They call them forest titans in their records. "But Father, these beings are what human legends call Sasquatch or Bigfoot, and they are real." Daesung sat back in his chair, struggling to process what he was hearing. "They are intelligent, Father, as intelligent as humans in their own way. And the Velthri have been capturing them for years because their physical strength and resilience make them valuable as heavy labor slaves." Min Chun's voice grew heavy with emotion. "I could not ignore this. I could not pretend I had not seen. And when I reported my findings through official channels, they killed the investigation and marked me for elimination." The recording showed coordinates deep in the Cascade Mountains of the Pacific Northwest. This is where they operate on Earth, a hidden base that local Velthri have maintained for generations, and this is where you will find proof of everything I have told you. Min Jun paused, and his eyes seemed to look directly at his father through time and space. "I know you, Father, and I know what you are thinking, but please understand that I did not send this to you for revenge." Daesung felt tears running down his weathered face. "I sent this because someone must protect those who cannot protect themselves. And there is no one in this galaxy I trust more than you to do what is right." The recording ended, and Daesung sat in silence for a long time. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and the darkness of the forest seemed to press against his windows like a living thing. He thought about his son, about the boy who had grown into a man of principle and courage, about the lieutenant who had died because he could not look away from suffering. He thought about his own years of service, the missions completed, the enemies defeated, the brothers lost along the way. He thought about the creatures in the forest, beings that had hidden from humanity for thousands of years, now being hunted by aliens from across the stars, and slowly something began to form in the cold space where his grief lived. It was not quite a plan. Not yet. But it was a purpose. Daesung stood and walked to the window. The Cascade Mountains rose in the distance, dark shapes against the darker sky, holding secrets that humanity had never imagined somewhere out there, hidden in valleys no human had ever walked. An intelligent species faced extinction at the hands of the same aliens who had murdered his son. He could not bring Min Jun back. He could not challenge the Velthri Dominion alone. But perhaps he did. Not need to be alone. Daesung began to prepare. He gathered his old equipment from the secure room beneath his cabin. Weapons and survival gear that had served him through decades of impossible missions. He studied the coordinates his son had provided, mapping the terrain, identifying approach routes, planning his infiltration. But he was not going to the Velthri base, not yet. First, he needed to go deeper into the wilderness than any human had gone before. First, he needed to find the forest titans first. He needed to offer them something no one else could. He would offer them a chance to fight back as dawn broke over the mountains. Daesung shouldered his pack and stepped out into the wet morning air. He did not look back at his cabin. He did not think about the life he was leaving behind. He thought only of his son, of the beings suffering in the darkness, and of the war. He was about to start. The old seal walked into the forest and disappeared among the ancient trees. He was not going to die in these mountains. He was going to find allies.